I think we have a Boy Scout troop here with us today, right? Are you guys with the Boy Scout group? You want to come up front? We're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a tradition we have. The Boy Scouts have to come up front. No, Jeremy, you don't have to come up front. Come on up front, right here in front of me. I invite you to join us with the Pledge of Allegiance. Just step right here. And what do we do? What do we face? Do we face the flag? Yeah. Okay, let's face the flag. Ready? You want to start me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call.
Garrick?
Here.
Pepcorn? Preston? Here. Strand?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here. Health. March 9th is a registered dietitian nutritionist day. Fargo County Public Health has 8 registered dietitian nutritionists on staff who are dedicated to improving the health of their patients, clients, and communities. Unknown fact, John, is my mother was a dietitian. Loved that work. She also loved to cook as well, but that worked out pretty well. Library. The library has returned to the spring of 2022. If you are new to gardening and don't know where to start, or if you're tired of the same old varieties, stop by the Maine or the Carson Library to pick up and try some seeds for free. There are a variety of vegetable, herb, and flower seeds available while supplies last. Fargo Public Library is accepting writing and art entries through April 30th for Northern Narratives Junior. It's a children-only edition of the library's literature publication. Children in kindergarten through 6th grade can submit short stories, poetry, comics, nonfiction essays, drawings, or photography. And next, March, it's Catch a Leprechaun event for kids on March 17th at the main library. Children will make a leprechaun trap, listen to a story, and learn about leprechauns and why they are so mischievous. Water treatment plant. The water treatment plant superintendent, Brian Ward, has received the Robert O. Vernon Membrane Plant Operator of the Year award. Only one of these awards is given nationwide every year and is jointly between the American Water Works Association and the American Membrane Technology Association, 2 prominent organizations in drinking water field. Brian was nominated for the award by AE2S, local engineering consulting firm that worked with Brian on the Fargo membrane water plant treatment plants, especially the reverse osmosis system. Well, that's a great award, isn't it, Tony? Yeah. Tonight, we're going to see 2 videos that show the behind-the-scenes work at the city's snowplow drivers. We had 11 blizzards this year. That's an award-winning number, Ben Dow says, but they didn't get anything special for that, but they did 11 blizzards. And we're also going to see a recent mural installation at the police department.
We all have our special zones. So if it's snowing, we all do our main route, which is all the main roads, and then we'll go into residentials after we get all the main roads finished. This is a wing plow. We use these for our main routes. We got road graders, and then we got loader plows. So the laser's really helpful at night when we're plowing. It tells me where my wing plow sits along the curb line. So when there's parked cars on the street, we have to go a lot slower and pick up our wings because a lot of the times we can't get around them. And then the next day, we try to come back and see if the parked cars move so then we can clear that spot. So with all the miles and zones we have in Fargo, we do try to get out there and work as hard as we can to clear the roads in a safe manner. There's always somebody on 24/7 during a snow event, and we try to clear the roads so everyone can make it to where they want to be safely.
Thanks, Ben, for reminding us how tough snow plowing is, and your crews did an excellent job over the winter, so we appreciate that. I don't quite want to see your bill yet, but I'm happy that you guys did good work, so. Is there a motion to approve the order of agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the February 22nd, 2022 meeting and the February 24th, 2022 special meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion or changes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Is there a motion to approve consent agenda items 1 through 30?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Strand,
Yes.
Garrick,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Mahoney,
Yes. Regular agenda resident comments. We have first on the docket is Christopher Cohn.
Yes, Christopher Cohn, Fargo resident. I want to talk about the Fargo Police Accountability and Oversight Board. So the first question I had is why the applications of the 7 candidates were not attached to the regular agenda. Tonight you're also considering two candidates for the Native American Commission, and their applications are attached. So I think Fargo residents should have had a chance to look at those. I looked at them because I put in an open records request back on the 14th, and finally they gave them to me today because I said that's in violation of the Open Records Act that you haven't given them to me. Made me wait this long because it is a violation. But I think also I was told that 6 of the applications were said to have come in after the deadline, so they weren't considered, but there wasn't a deadline. So the applications could be given beginning on the January 10th, and then the selection committee was going to look at them on the 27th. So it appears that the selection committee made quick decisions, maybe in the first day only, or the second part of the second day, and then anyone else who put in an application after that was disqualified. No, I think those 6 applications should be looked at and considered, because some of them are, I just looked at one of them. It was an LGBT person and a young person. And he was also Native American. By the way, only one person out of the 7 candidates identifies as a person of color. 3 of them identify as white. The other 3 don't identify in race or ethnicity. I think one of the others might be a person of color, but we shouldn't assume. And she doesn't want to declare that. So essentially, we only have one known person of color on this board. Also, there are no LGBT people on it. The 7 candidates, there's no one who has a disability. I don't think any of them are young people. And none of them had ever said they had a mental illness. That's an important issue, the police dealing with people with mental illnesses. Also, I don't have enough time. I'm running out of time, so thank you.
Vanessa Clark.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Clark. I am a community member. I live here in Fargo. I am here to talk about Authentic Housing. They are the ones proposing the affordable housing, 181 units. They're in competition with Kilbourne's luxury condo complex. I'm here to say that we don't need more luxury condos in downtown Fargo, because we had the study come out that said we desperately need affordable housing in downtown Fargo and Fargo at large. It is a huge priority. It's something that needs to be put as top priority. We talk about the new redevelopment plans and raising property values and bringing in businesses that are going to bring us in more sales tax. And in a way, this sounds, and then all that money is going to go into the tax incentive funds, and those funds can later be used to have more affordable housing. It sounds like trickle-down economics for housing. We're going to put the priority in raising property values and later get to affordable housing, when that study made it clear we need affordable housing now. It's something that needs to be addressed now. You talk about there's other affordable housing options in the city, but if you look at the apartment that are here already that are more affordable. Talk to the people that live in these apartments. These buildings are old, they're broken down, the management's horrible, the landlords are horrible, they are not taking care of the residents. Authentic Housing is not just a for-profit business, they are a public benefit corporation. They are there to try to serve a need of the public. And what I'm asking is that the city put the needs of people first. We don't want this to be a town that's only welcoming for people with money. We want this to be a place that cares about everybody that lives here, starting with our most vulnerable. We talk about making Fargo a nicer community, and nice actually has to mean that we serve the people here that need it the most. The biggest issue that came up with this is parking, but there's a parking structure 2 blocks away. We're talking about getting an EV car share program. We're talking about using the public transit, and it got brought up that our transit lines wouldn't be able to handle that. That shouldn't be we can't do it because transit doesn't work. That should be we need to also improve our transit. It will take time to get this building up. We need better public transportation in this city. We're talking about getting affordable housing for downtown Fargo for people that actually work downtown, so people that work here can afford to live downtown. That'll also cut down on needs for cars. I think Authentic Housing is a business that has vision for moving the city forward. They're talking about housing that is designed to be more eco-friendly. We're talking about, I'm just saying, I think people here should put more thought into this. This is something that's actually got people here passionate and willing to work on this. We have other people in the community that have expressed deep interest in this, and I think it needs to be given more serious consideration.
Thank you, Vanessa. We don't usually applaud at this meeting. Thank you. I'm going to move to item 32C, just because that's not a public hearing, because we're going to do a continuance. Do I have a motion to do a continuance of item 32C?
So move.
There's a second.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Garrick?
Yes.
Strand?
Yes.
Preston?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. We got another minute. Ian, could you give us a report on 36, the firearms ruling, please?
My name is Ian McLean. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys, just here to give a quick report on the firearms case. As you may know, on February 3rd, 2022, the court entered its order on the firearm case. But just give you a little background first, so everybody is on the same page. The last legislative session, the state passed, or the state amended a statute 62.10103, which basically provides that no home rule city, such as the city of Fargo, can enact an ordinance which relates to the sale of firearms, which is more restrictive than state law. It's the key there is more restrictive than state law. The city has 2 zoning ordinances which basically prohibit the home occupation of selling firearms, whether it's in a residential or an agricultural district. So the question was, are those ordinances more restrictive than state law? So that's what went to the court. The court found in favor of the city, essentially finding that if there is no state law, the city ordinance cannot be more restrictive than a law that does not exist. The state, of course, argued if there is no state law on it, then any law is more restrictive. There were cases from other jurisdictions, including Oklahoma, which the court basically said all went in favor of the city. So I think the question is, where does that lead us? There's 3 options. One is the state has the right to appeal. And if they appeal, it goes to the Supreme Court of North Dakota. They have an absolute right to do so. It will be decided de novo, which means anew, which means no deference is given to the district court. So it'll be 5 justices looking at it new. They have about another month, a little bit over a month to make that decision. They have not made that decision yet, to my knowledge. They have not appealed. Obviously, there's a tragic passing of the attorney general. There's a new attorney general. They probably also got to talk to the legislature. Number 2 is, what does the legislature do at the next legislative session? Even if they don't appeal, they may find, well, you know what, we think we can fix the holes that the court pointed out, and also that the city pointed out in its briefing. It's just easier to do it that way. Or number 3, nothing happens. The state legislature does not take any action. There's no appeal. But for the time being, this ordinance is in effect. It's going to be in effect until either the Supreme Court reverses the district court, or the legislature tries again to amend its statute to fix all of the holes the court pointed out. So that's where we're at right now.
Any questions by the commissioners? Thank you, Ian. Appreciate it. We go to public input opportunity, item 32A, Golden Valley 6th Edition. Approval recommended by the Planning Commission on 11/2/21. Zoning change from AG agriculture to single dwelling residential. First reading of the rezoning ordinance and a plat of the Golden Valley 6th Edition. Donald Crest to explain.
Good evening, Commissioners. Donald Kress of the Department of Planning and Development. Your packet for this item includes an ordinance prepared by the City Attorney's Office. As the Mayor stated, 32A is the Golden Valley 6th Edition. To locate that, here is 25th Street South, 64th Avenue South, County Drain 53. There are several other Golden Valley subdivisions surrounding this. This is the remaining unplatted part of that. The current zoning is agricultural. The proposed zoning is SR4, which is a single dwelling residential district. The project site is undeveloped. It looked like that late last fall, and a little snowier version of this from last Friday. As you see, there are some adjacent houses on the adjacent subdivisions. The subdivision plat creates 26 lots in 2 blocks and also dedicates public right-of-way as indicated here. The applicant's representative, Ian Bullis of Eagle Ridge Development is with us this evening and may wish to address the commission. The Planning Commission's recommendation is stated in the staff report and shown on your screen. That concludes staff's presentation, Commissioners. Thank you.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this rezoning?
Good evening, Commission. Ian Bullis on behalf of Eagle Ridge, just here to answer any questions should they arise.
Okay. Anybody else in the public want to speak to this rezoning? If not, close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Could I ask a question first?
Sure.
Donald,
Yes, ma'am.
so on the agenda item that we have in front of us, it looks like there was a plan for a crossover over that drain, and then there's X's there. Can you explain those on our agenda? I don't know if it shows up in any of
In
your,
your staff report, you mean?
yeah, inside the staff report.
Okay.
I guess my question would be, is there a plan for a crossover the drain there?
On 67th,
Yeah?
yes, I believe. I'll let city engineer answer that one more detail, ma'am. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Preston, there is a drain crossing. One of the things we've learned, especially to the north, is to make sure we get that connectivity across the drain. So we will be installing a drain crossing here. Selkirk is on the west side of this, and they're not developed yet to this point. So once we bring that development on the west side down, then we'll be looking at making that connection.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. Donald, I'm just curious, if this was previously agriculturally zoned, and it's been that way, well, forever, I'm assuming we had a deferred specials on that property and that those specials will kick in now?
Commissioner, I think I have to
Brenda's coming up again.
bring Brenda back
Brenda,
here.
might as well stay up there.
Sorry. Yes, Commissioner Strand, you are correct. Going from ag to plat will trigger those specials to be spread.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Preston,
Aye.
Garrig,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Mahoney.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Steve Sprague, special assessment for sewer repairs.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Tonight, what we have in front of you are the 2021 sewer repairs that the city assisted property owners with. So a little bit of a refresher maybe on this program. If a property owner has their sewer line repaired, they can choose to put it on special assessments. It's a 15-year assessment, and then the interest rate is set at 5%. Under certain circumstances, the city will pay part of the cost if they replace the connection at the sewer main and have to dig in the street to do that. All of the property owners have signed a petition requesting that they be assessed for this repair.
Does anyone present wish to speak to the sewer repairs? Does the president wish to speak? If not, I'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Garrick.
I'm going to recuse myself because I think I'm on the list. So,
Commissioner
Well,
Garrett
there's no
had,
real financial gain for him, right? Ian, he's just being assessed. He's not getting any.
Right, but he has the right to recuse himself.
yeah, I'm just
Okay.
get clean.
Commissioner Strang.
I wouldn't call that a conflict of interest. You don't have a financial gain by voting for or against this. A financial gain is where you're lining your pockets with something. I think it's proper that you notice us that you're in this list, but I wouldn't consider it a conflict. And I'll say further, you're obligated by statute to vote unless there's a conflict.
Steve, now, when people turn to this to specials, is that 25 years?
this is a 15-year assessment.
15 years assessment. Okay, thank you. Any other discussion?
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm just curious, Steve, of these properties, how many of them are emergencies where they have a winter break and they have to address it then? Or how many are proactive when they're going down their streets and working on the neighborhoods anyway?
We don't ask that question, but my feeling is it's probably about 50-50. About half of them are in a position where they on a regular basis have to have their sewer line cleaned and just want to get it taken care of so they don't have to do that anymore. And then probably about the other half are properties where it's a complete shutdown and they have to get it taken care of.
Thank you, and I'll continue. This might be an engineering discussion to have at some point, but I'd like to know where we're aiming and how this looks in the bigger picture. Are we getting more incidents of these breakings of the pipes, water lines? Are we getting fewer? Are we having more problems coming? Do we need to be proactive going forward so that we can cut this off at the pass? I just want to know the bigger picture. This is a lot.
Yeah, this list has grown substantially. We do have a couple of companies that are out there. They're going door to door and they're seeking the business. We don't have a prohibition against that method of doing this. And so, right now, that is something that is allowed. Engineering has changed. They are more proactive when we're doing a full street reconstruction now. We are lining it to behind the curb. So at least when they come, if they end up having to do their sewer line, they're only having to go from the curb to the house. Mm-hmm. So that should help cut down on the cost. The ones it's getting substantially more expensive to dig in the street. If you think of a one-time, just getting there to set up, and then it's so many thousand feet per foot deep. So the costs have gone up considerably.
Commissioner Preston?
I just have a question, and Brenda, this one might be for you again. So we're talking breakage in sewer lines? Are we talking raw sewage going into soil?
So a lot of the old sewer pipes are clay tile, and they crack. But in reality, it's kind of amazing the way our soils are. They also protect that outer edge. So what you'll find is sometimes they'll do some PVC linings, sometimes they'll replace it. So just like Steve was talking about, is property owners are responsible from the connection to include the connection to their house. So historically, during our water main replacement projects, we tried to get people to sign a paper and allow us to replace that, where today we were just starting to see so many breaks that we came back to leadership and said, we just need to replace them. We need to replace them all to the curb because we were just finding so many issues in the roadway. So at least if there is an issue at that point, it's in the boulevard to their house, and it's all just digging in the dirt.
But to clarify, it sounds like there's not a whole lot of leakage of raw sewage.
No,
Okay.
And what typically happens is if there is some kind of a failure, it ends up being a backup and it backs up into the home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
So-
it's not just spreading out in the soil somewhere.
yeah, so typically it'll collapse and then your,
okay.
your sewage can't get to our mainline sewer pipe.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Preston,
Aye.
Strand,
Yes.
Mahoney,
Yes. Tony, you want to vote one way or the other? Okay. Item 33, Jeremy Gordon. We're going to talk about Veterans Boulevard Corridor Extension, and I think you have some help tonight.
That's right. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about the Veterans Boulevard Corridor Study. As you know, Veterans Boulevard extends from I-94 down to 52nd Avenue South today. And one day it'll get down to 100th Avenue South. So this study looked at the 1 mile that we've already built from 40th Avenue down to 52nd Avenue, recommended some improvements we may want to take on there in the short to midterm. And then really the plowed field from 52nd Avenue all the way down to 100th. We at MetroCog, I brought this idea up that we should have a corridor study completed on this road because it is a city limit boundary between us and Horace. So it'll be a document that we can all reference back to when things start to grow and develop down there. So I'll leave it at the high level here. Dan Farnsworth is with MetroCog and Scott Medow is with KLJ. We initiated the study 2 years ago, and looks like we went to Cass County a couple weeks ago, and we're at Horace tonight. So I think we're well on our way to having this received and filed and hopefully approved. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thank you for the introduction, Jeremy, and thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for allowing us to present this study to us that we've been working on since 2020, as Jeremy mentioned. And so just to kind of go over the study a little bit, just overview. The study, as Jeremy mentioned, is from 52nd Avenue to 100th Avenue South. That's a 4 mile stretch. And but there's also a portion that was looked at from 40th Avenue to 52nd Avenue, where those roundabouts are currently. It's a 2-lane roadway. And just to see any implications of a potential extension to veterans would have on that section there. Also, as part of this plan, we did put together an implementation plan on phased implementing of this corridor as well as other ones in the nearby area. So a lot of coordination. This is kind of the where a lot of jurisdictions meet. And so it's very important for us to continue to coordinate, and this plan, we believe, did a very good job at that. As part of this study, we had a 15-member study review committee, and that consisted of representation from Cass County, cities of Fargo, Horace, and West Fargo, and a few other entities as well. We also conducted public involvement as part of this study, and so we had 2 public involvement meetings. One was in the fall of 2020 and then the summer of 2021. These were virtual engagement opportunities, so people could take an online survey, could comment with the online interactive map, and there was a virtual open house as well. In addition to that, we used social media, press release, to get the word out there. And then we also did direct mailings to the Deer Creek neighborhood because that is close to the Veterans Boulevard extension, and also getting their feedback of a potential connection or two to that neighborhood, since there are very few connections. You'll see in the pie chart there to the right that just one of the survey results, that what were people looking for, what were the citizens looking for, and it's pretty split between safety, vehicle efficiency, and livability. Go to the next slide there, and I'll turn this one over to Scott.
Thank you, Commissioners. I just want to go through kind of some of the design components of this study. The first thing we looked at is from 52nd down to 100th is just kind of trying to determine an alignment for the proposed Veterans Boulevard extension. So we looked at 3 different alternatives. The first one on the top being kind of the standard practice around here is following the section line. The next one we looked at in the green is more trying to align along the drain. And we looked at that to try and reduce the amount of small undevelopable parcels between Drain 53 and Veterans Boulevard. And then the bottom one in the orange, we looked at mirroring the drain from 52nd down to about 64th And then from 64th down south, shifting the roadway about to the east, about 50 to 100 feet, to line up within the city of Fargo boundary. After discussion with the study review committee, the top alternative was selected to move forward with. So once we did determine an alignment, we looked at 3 different alternatives for Veterans Boulevard. All 3 of them have just 1 lane in each direction based on the traffic needs. The one key from this is there is no recommendation in the report. These are just 3 alternatives we looked at and presented to the public. The first one is, again, like I said, a 3-lane section, 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. The major intersections, which we're looking at, are 88th, 76th, and 64th, are either signal controlled or stop controlled. They have dedicated right and left turn lanes. The alternative also does include a shared use path on each side of the roadway and access about every 1/8 mile that is unrestricted. The next alternative we looked at is very similar to the first, 1 lane in each direction, except at the major intersections, we used roundabout intersections opposed to standard intersections. This caused a raised median through the corridor that gives access control at all locations, but then full access at the 1/4 mile points. And again, this has a shared use path on each side of the road. The third alternative we looked at was, we're calling it the modified or variable alternative. It's more of a transit-oriented section. And what it does is it breaks the roadway up into 3 different typical sections. So typical section A is from 100th to 88th, as well as 64th to 52nd. Typical section B is from 88th Avenue to 76th. And typical section C is from 76th to 64th. And I'll walk through each one of those. So first one is typical section A. And this is basically the same typical section as we looked at in alternative 1. Again, this is from 100th to 88th, as well as 64th to 52nd. 1 lane in each direction, center left turn lane, and shared use paths on both sides of the road. The next one is typical section B, and that is from 76th to 64th. And with this one, we looked at, this is kind of where we come up with a transit-oriented solution, and we mirrored what, if you're familiar with 17th Avenue in West Fargo through the Charleswood neighborhood, it keeps your through movements on the center of the roadway. And then for parking, we looked at adding frontage roads on each side. That also helps with access control. This one also includes not only shared use paths on both sides of the road, but it also has a independent kind of pedestrian zone for walking, and then an amenity zone as well. This one is the most expensive out of all the alternatives, just with the sheer volume of pavement, curb and gutter, things like that. And the last section from 76th to 64th, we looked at shifting the roadway center line within the right-of-way to the east. And we looked at this to promote more separation between the drain and the roadway. Based on Horace's long-range plan, that area between Veterans Boulevard and Drain 53, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but this is where the drain gets really close to Veterans Boulevard. That's slated to be green space, and so we figured we could piggyback on that and create kind of a meandering shared use path along the west side of the roadway. Again, we have the right-of-way there, so we shifted to the east. We also incorporated parking. So again, shared use path on both sides of the road.
All right, I'll talk about this one here quickly. One thing we did hear from the City of Fargo, especially the Planning Department, the City of Fargo is also working on a Fargo transportation plan. And the opportunity for grade separations for the pedestrians and bicyclists would be a great amenity and a safe amenity for those users. And so as part of this plan, we just wanted to point out that we are showing grade separations every half mile. So that could be likely a tunnel. I suppose it could be a bridge too, but it's far more expensive to, say, do this when you already have a road down, but since there is no road down there right now, this would be much more feasible to do, and it'd be a great opportunity to do that. There's also as you know, there'll be a large pond which is under construction, and access to other amenities there too as well. One other thing, as I mentioned at the very beginning, talking about Deer Creek, the Deer Creek neighborhood, there's only 2 connections in and out of Deer Creek, a lot of homes in that area, a lot of residences. And so as part of the study, we did take a look at how we could connect potentially in and out of that neighborhood. So 2 different connections were identified. One of them was there at 59th Avenue, and another one was at 62nd Street. 62nd Street, there's already a stub of a road, and it ends right where the Horace boundary begins. The city of Horace does have right-of-way already platted for that, so that seems to be a very likely connection in the future. 64th is not much of a roadway at this point, but likely will be more in the future, be a paved roadway with more traffic in the future. As far as volumes of traffic, looking between about 1,000 and 2,000 vehicles a day per connection if they were just standalone connections. Now, if they're both there together, you would have about almost half that traffic on those connections. So just wanted to point that out as far as the study. When we did sit down with our stakeholders, one of them was emergency response. They did identify that additional connections in and out of neighborhoods is very important for emergency response. Also, as you know, there's a new middle school and a new high school just south of here in Horace. And so some of these students would presumably be going to those schools. And so this would allow for another connection to them. Also provides better bicycle and pedestrian connections to the area and to the amenities that would be to the east of here. I'll bring it back to Scott.
Another part of this study was looking at Veterans Boulevard from 52nd all the way up to 40th. One of the items that was brought up was the existing roundabouts and ease of usage where maintenance and emergency vehicles. And so what we looked at is how we could improve the efficiency of the existing roundabouts. The existing roundabout diameter from outside of curb to outside of curb is approximately 150 feet. That size is accommodating based on studies for a truck. So what we looked at is maybe we could keep that inside circle, keep some of that existing infrastructure, and just realign the approaches for each one of those roundabouts, and enter and exit more tangentially to the circle to improve the flow. The other thing we looked at is if people didn't like that, we could look at reconstructing the entire roundabout and increasing the circle diameter from 150 feet to 180 feet. That 180 feet we got from just around town. We've gotten positive feedback from the roundabouts on 25th Street, and those are about 180 feet in diameter.
All right, I believe this might be the last slide here, and I'll just go over this quick. It's maybe a little hard to see it. Maybe on your screens you can see it better, but this kind of takes a look at the big picture of that southwest area and implementing not just veterans, but how to best phase other roadways in that area. And this is very important because it requires a lot of coordination with other jurisdictions. As you know, this area is growing very fast. There's the new middle school, new high school down there in Horace. Last I saw of the Permits Plus, the fall edition there, the city of Horace had more housing permits than the city of West Fargo. So that just gives you an idea how fast Horace is growing and will grow. So with that said, looking at Veterans Extension, we did identify that veterans would might make sense for the veterans to just kind of march south as far as construction. But we noted here that the most demand would be with veterans between 64th and 88th Avenue, actually. I will point out that Cass County, in cooperation with the City of Fargo, is working on connecting 76th there from Cheyenne Street, County Road 17, to 45th Street up to Fargo, allowing residents from Horace and other areas to be able to not always have to take County Road 17, Cheyenne Street. That's the only relief valve currently is County Road 17, unless they want to go all the way south to 100th. So it's very important that this connection be made, and it is being made, and will be done at the end of this year. And so that's important, and so that allows that section from 52nd Avenue to 64th of Veterans to not be quite as necessary right away. And I will note that it would be an expensive section, mile section, because you do have to cross the drain there. And also, as far as payment of that, there's not a whole lot of development to the east there. There's the big lake, the big pond that's going in there. So anyway, we're identifying that Veterans Boulevard between 64th Avenue and 88th would be something that would be necessary before the year 2030. now going from 88th down to 100th. That would also be needed before 2030. However, that could just be improved from minimum maintenance road to just a blacktop surface there. And then as far as 64th, I'll point that out as well. 64th is very important as far as east-west connectivity. As you know, the city of Fargo is embarking on a project there over the interstate. That'll be done the end of this year, I believe. And then continuing on to 45th Street. And so to be able to connect 64th from 45th to County Road 17, which is Cheyenne Street, is very important. And that's something Horace is really interested in, and looking to see if we'll continue to work with Fargo to see if that's something that could be possible to make that full connection from County Road 17 to the interstate. So there's a lot of connections here. I won't go through all of them. I will note that Cass County is also working on County Road 17, making some improvements there, and some safety and repaving improvements. So I won't dwell too much longer on this unless anybody has any questions, or if you want to add on this map here, Jeremy.
Commissioners have any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Preston.
I have a couple. So in looking at the design of this road, what's the land use projection along the whole road?
It's primarily residential with little office and commercial mixed in at the corners, section corners.
So in the conversation or in the discussion, in the decision-making, where was traffic calming as part of all of this? I look at this straight shot and the intersections look like they're pretty separated. And with all of the trouble we've had with drag racing, first thing I think about is that.
Okay, so let's see. So the good thing about the Veterans all by itself, this graphic shows the whole area, but just Veterans itself, the good thing is traffic volumes are projected to just keep it a one-lane road in each direction with a center turn lane. It won't have to be expanded to a multi-lane roadway. So that's the one benefit. This is going to be a pretty sleepy section line road, much like it is in the Osgood area, but it's going to have shared use paths on each side. And we're striving. One thing we've learned in the last couple of years is that we have to strive to get pedestrian grade separations under these arterial roads. Just like at Shields Arena on 32nd Avenue. If the road goes up, you can put an underpass in there pretty easily at initial construction.
But Jeremy, on 25th Avenue, when you go from 40th down to 52nd with the roundabouts, it doesn't seem to have drag racing. It seems like that road to Davies has been not a big area of complaints. It's the multi-lanes that go east-west that cause this problem.
Exactly. And we made the decision in 2010 to build those 3 roundabouts because of that same, it was going to be a racetrack down to the school.
If I could.
Mr. Preston.
Yeah, for sure. With just one lane going each direction, it makes a difference. Assuming this, however, will come up for expansion in the future, can you just give a little more rationale as to why the curves in the road was not the recommendation?
Well, I should maybe step back. So this is a study. None of these options are for or against today.
Okay.
We're going to accept all these, and we're not even really close to construction on any of this. So when we do, it's not programmed in our work plan in the next 4 or 5 years. We will come back in front of the city commission with a design alternative.
Okay, so then I misunderstood.
But
your
point is noted though. This is complicated because it is a city limit boundary, and funding becomes an issue if you're not right down the middle. You pay your half, we'll pay our half. If it is off alignment, then it gets kind of difficult.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion to receive and file?
So move. Second.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please. Thank you. Good presentation. Appreciate it.
Strand,
Yes.
Garrick,
Yes.
Yeah.
Mahoney,
Yes. Item 34, Commissioner Gehrig would like a presentation of clinical studies that show masking stops the spread of COVID-19 especially in children in schools. Desi Fleming to start.
If I could.
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Gregg.
About 10 days ago, I asked for this request for Cass County Public Health to present clinical studies that show masking stops the spread, especially in children. My expectation was that we would have those clinical studies in the agenda for the public record. So because there are no studies in the agenda and no memo saying why, I would ask that anyone presenting today would forward those studies to the commission so that it can be part of the public record. And so that we know that they are studies and not simply articles. So I'll let you guys go from there. And last meeting, we limited the presentations to 5 minutes. If you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Well, in the past, when we've had public health present, we haven't had time limits. When you had your expert present, you suggested the 5 minute. So I would suggest that public health does a presentation since you really want this presentation.
Right, so I'll ask for what I want and see what happens. That's how this works.
Okay. Desi Fleming, you're up.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Again, yes, Commissioner Garrick requested a presentation of clinical studies on the efficacy of masks addressing specifically children in school settings. So joining us tonight are select members from our physician advisory group to present that information, as well as identifying misinformation. Our advisory group consists of 7 physicians with expertise in epidemiology, infectious disease, pediatrics, and mental health. Before the presentation, I would like to take a minute just to review the process that Fargo Cass Public Health continues to utilize when making COVID recommendations. Similar to local public health throughout the country, we rely heavily on guidance from various national sources such as the CDC, American Academy of Pediatrics, World Health Organization, and other credible sources. Because this guidance is meant to be adapted to meet state level needs, we then work with the North Dakota Department of Health to further refine any recommendations. At the local level, we have our Physicians Advisory Group who consult with Fargo Cass Public Health to add, adapt, and evaluate recommendations to best promote the health and safety of our community. Those recommendations are then passed along to the public and reevaluated on an ongoing basis. I would like to publicly thank the Physicians Advisory Group tonight for volunteering their time and sharing their expertise throughout this pandemic. Their input has been extremely valuable for all of us. I will now turn this over to our health officer, Dr. Newman, and she can introduce tonight's speakers.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. As Desi said, Fargo Cass Public Health has 3 physicians from our advisory panel here to present. We'll start with Dr. Plow Carson, an infectious disease specialist and professor at both UND School of Medicine and Health Sciences and NDSU in the Department of Public Health. He serves as the director of the Center of Immunization Research and Education at NDSU, and he was the former director of clinical research at Sanford Health. He will be followed by comments from Dr. Ravish Nagpal, infectious disease specialist and medical director for infection prevention at Sanford. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Grant Severson, pediatric rheumatologist and NDAAP advocacy chair. Dr. Severson serves on the national advocacy committees for the American College of Rheumatology and the Arthritis Foundation. I too just echo that we are very grateful for the volunteering of their time and expertise and really for their service to our community throughout this pandemic. With that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Carson.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Mahoney and members of the commission. I'll try and make this as quick as I possibly can. I'm going to share my screen and maybe you can give me a nod, Tracy, when you see that. Or
we've got it. We can see it. Go ahead, Paul.
Great. So I'm going to try and move through the current state of the science on face masks and finish particularly with the issues around children in schools. When we look at this type of research, it's very important to first ask when we see a study, what is the question that they're trying to answer? And lots of studies get talked about and bantered about, and they are often answering very different questions and sometimes applied wrongly to the question that's at hand. So the questions can be, do masks protect the individual from infection? And what type, if there's a difference in the types? Do masks help with source control to protect others from infection? Are there critical thresholds needed for community masking to maybe have efficacy at the population level? And do mandates improve mask compliance? And does it matter if those mandates have a consequence with them or not? And more importantly, do mandates decrease community transmission? And again, specifically for the agenda this evening, at the school, in schools and in children. Commissioner Garrett, your request for the references can all be found here in the CDC science brief. They collect research, and it's not their own. It's compiled from numerous countries, numerous research universities, They have 90 references on there. I'll be showing a few of those, and you'll see the citation at the bottom of each of my slides, but they can all be found on the science brief on community use of masks to control the spread of SARS-CoV-2. I'll risk boring you for 1 second here on research design because it's important when we try and look at these studies. There's a hierarchy to evidence quality in the types of research that's done. And we have what's called descriptive epidemiology, which is really kind of like it sounds. It's describing what's being seen. And you have analytic epidemiology, where you have a control group. You're trying to compare it against someone who's exposed to the thing you're looking at and other groups that aren't exposed to the thing. These all have potential confounding variables and potential bias. And so at the very top of this are what we call randomized controlled trials. We take a big group of people who obviously look alike, and you divide them into half that get masks, half that don't get masks. Those are the best studies. They eliminate much of the problems with bias and confounding that we are always plagued with in research. But they're very hard to do. They're very expensive. And the best study that would have been done would have been randomizing a big group of people to not wearing masks during the pandemic and another big group of people to wearing masks. No research ethics board would approve that kind of a study during a pandemic, which is potentially lethal to some people. And so we're left with a lot more of what we call these observational type studies, which much of medicine and much of public health depends upon. And some of these are better than others. Cohort studies are better than what we call ecological studies. And I'm going to just touch on how that can be a problem here as we move to the better studies. So much has been talked about with the West Fargo public school comparison. This was in the news. It's been, I think it was even mentioned at the last city commission meeting. And the fact that West Fargo appeared to have the same or lower COVID positivity rate than Fargo public schools, despite no mask requirement, which was put in place with Fargo public schools. So that's an interesting question and a fair thing to say what might be behind that. But a good researcher, this isn't a study yet, it's not published. I'm told that there's somebody that's in the process of trying to do that. It'll be good to see that data when it comes out and the statistical analysis on that. But just take, for example, the immediate problem there with Fargo and West Fargo. There's marked differences in household median income. There's marked differences in the number of people living in poverty. There's marked differences in the racial distribution of those communities. All of those are known predictors of risk for COVID acquisition. These are what we call the social determinants of health. I've tried to get things like vaccination rates and testing rates, which are a little harder to come by for each of these, but we know that vaccination rates, for example, highly correlate with poverty and racial mix and so on. So we would expect those to be different. So if a good researcher is doing their job, they'll account for those differences. Actually, preferably, they try and find two groups of people that don't have all of those differences, but when they do, they'll try and account for them and adjust for those. We don't have any of that with that comparison with Fargo and West Fargo. I will show you some studies in other school districts that did try and adjust for those. And then I would also say that it would not surprise me, even if we could adjust for all of that, that there might not have been much benefit to mask mandate in one school district compared to another here, because these things also matter on the context they're in. And the context is that most of North Dakota was not masking at all at the time this sort of comparison was done. We have been one of the lowest masked, I'm not even anywhere near the school day data yet. I'll try and move quick. We have been one of the lowest masked states, if not the lowest in the country. And so you might expect having kids mask in school while everybody else isn't doing that, and it sort of ends when you walk out school, might not have much impact. So what about the individual? I'm sharing one study out of many that's on that CDC, collected on that CDC website. And this was the USS Theodore Roosevelt, where a big outbreak occurred amongst their almost 5,000 crew members. 28% became overtly infected. And notably from the beginning, the attack rate was much lower in the medical staff on that aircraft carrier, only 16%. Despite them coming into much more frequent contact with crew members who had COVID because they were assessing all of them. And the big difference there is thought to be their regular use of masking and other PPE, personal protective equipment. Interestingly, they did a later assessment of a subset of 382 of those crew members that were dropped off and stationed in Guam, found that when you did antibody testing, 60% of them actually had been infected in that recent outbreak. But they compared those who were infected with those who weren't, and those who weren't had the interesting finding that that they regularly wore masks. And those people that reported regular mask wearing had a 70% decreased likelihood of being in that group that tested antibody positive for COVID that compared to the group that didn't wear masks regularly. A similar study out of California looked at people who tested positive for SARS-CoV-2 and those who also presented for testing but tested negative for SARS-CoV-2. And they found when they looked at those who tested negative, they could find that regular wearing of cloth masks had decreased the odds of contracting SARS-CoV-2 by 56%, surgical masks by 66%, and an N95 regular wearing decreased their risk by 83%. And this study adjusted for a number of those things that we care about that weren't done when we try and look at that Fargo, West Fargo data. They adjusted for vaccine status, household income, race, age, sex, and population density. What about as source control from others? We know that successful transmission of a pathogen often requires an adequate inoculum. That is a volume of the pathogen or a volume of the virus. You need to get enough of it in you to cause an infection. Interestingly, that inoculum size also may play a role in how severe the infection is. I'll just show this visual study that was put out in the journal Thorax, which is one of the chest medicine journals. And they looked at, they did a tangential light source to compare people who weren't wearing masks to 1-layer cloth mask, 2 layers of cloth masks, and a surgical mask to look at a visual display of the droplets that are emitted with that. They also did this with people talking, people counting, and people coughing, but I'm just going to show you the sneeze because it's the most obvious one. And so when you looked at that no mask, 1-layer, 2-layer surgical mask, and somebody initiating a sneeze, you can see this just awful, it's kind of gross, but this big volume of droplets that are emitted with a sneeze, less with 1 layer of a cloth mask, more so with 2 layers, and very little with that surgical mask. Now, it shouldn't be too hard to imagine that a person standing in front of this person is going to be exposed to a much higher inoculum than someone standing in front of this person. And even though a transmission might still occur, because you heard last time about aerosol versus droplet, you're much more likely to get a lower inoculum and have a less severe infection. And in fact, we've seen the virulence of COVID falling throughout the pandemic. Another study that looked at that using masks as source control, this is a higher quality observational study, not a randomized trial, but it's up on the ladder. This is called a cohort, a retrospective cohort study, looking at 41 households who had secondary transmission after someone in the household came home with COVID, compared to 83 households that did not have any secondary transmission in the household. And they looked at what things predicted no transmission. And if one or more members of that household regularly wore a mask before the person got sick, so they were these are people that are wearing them very regularly, there was almost 80% reduction in the likelihood that you'd end up in that one of those households with secondary transmission. The best study done to date, the highest quality study done to date, was called the Bangladesh community trial. This was a randomized controlled trial. It's called a cluster randomized controlled trial. It was done with Yale University partnering with the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. They randomized several hundred villages to getting education about masking. So mask promotion wasn't mandates, wasn't actual forcing or anything like that. It was getting education, being given a mask, and regularly reminded to use the mask. And what did they find? They brought up the mask wearing rate from a low of 13% to 42%. So still the majority of the communities that got the intervention weren't wearing masks, but they did improve mask wearing by a modest amount. And they reduced the incidence of COVID in the communities that had the intervention compared to the communities that didn't have the intervention by about 11.6%. Not a big reduction, but this is highly statistically significant. Very well-designed study that eliminates a lot of that confounding. And more importantly, they had a 35% reduction in people over the age of 60. So this was one of the best trials to date. And it occurred between the alpha and the delta waves of the pandemic. If they would have had a lot more infections, we may have seen more opportunity to see if the masks benefited. And you have to wonder what would have happened if they could have gotten masking up to 60 or 70 or 80%. Then finally, do mandates improve mask compliance? And nobody's looked at it with or without consequences, but there have been some looks at mandates. And in particular, Commissioner Garrick's wanting to know about schools and children. First, the one study prior to the school data. This is, I think, probably the best trial I have seen to date. A retrospective cohort study just published a little over a week ago in the journal Health Affairs. These researchers, and I think this was Harvard, looked at counties in the United States that were exposed to mask mandates versus those that weren't, and they went to great pains to pair up counties that were very much alike. So alike in the incidence of COVID, alike in their rural-urban mix, alike in their racial mix, alike in a number of other different potential confounding variables. And they found that those counties with a mandate reduced their likelihood of COVID case counts by about 33%. Now, school data, similar kind of look to what we heard with West Fargo Public Schools, but in a much bigger scale. This was one of the first studies published on this, this was out of California, if I remember right, looking at counties with and without school mask requirements. And the dark blue are counties without school mask requirements, and the light blue are counties with school mask requirements. And you can see from the time before school started to 1 to 2 weeks after school started, there became large differences between these two groups. And they did try to adjust for age, race, ethnicity, pediatric COVID vaccination status, COVID community transmission, population density, social vulnerability index, COVID community vulnerability score, and percentage uninsured, and percentage living in poverty. So they went through that tough job of trying to adjust for these, and these differences still showed up. Another study for the schools was in Arizona, comparing almost 1,000 schools that were subjected to mask mandates in Maricopa County and Pima County. And they found that the schools without mask requirements were 3.5 times more likely to have an outbreak in their school than schools that did have a mask mandate. Here they didn't adjust for as much. So a criticism of this study, legitimate criticism, is that they did not adjust for things like vaccination status, which could be a big confounder there, although this is a pretty big difference of 3.5-fold. Last is Michigan data. This was prepared for the governor of Michigan by the Michigan Department of Health. And they looked at incidents of COVID at the start of school. And these are the different age groups. Focus on the pink, which is the 5 to 18-year-old age group. And you can see everybody was kind of going up, going into the fall of 2021. But then after school started, that school age group blasted off a lot faster than all the rest of the age groups. 5 to 18-year-olds had much higher incidence as they congregated in school. The Michigan Department of Health then looked at these 533 school districts. So this is a huge study. 533 school districts, 1.25 million students studied, and looked at those schools, districts that had few mask rules versus partial or masks required. And there was marked differences between those with the schools without mask requirements accelerating much more quickly. They did not report in this on whether they adjusted for any of those other potential confounding variables. So I don't know about that. And then last, I thought that was the last one. Here is the last one. This was a Georgia study in school districts where they were looking at things like improved ventilation, masking of teachers, masking of students, and a few other things. They found that schools that, and this was large number of schools again in Georgia, schools that had improved ventilation saw 39% less likelihood of outbreaks and cases in their schools. Masking of teachers had a 37% reduction. Masking of students had a 21% reduction, but it was not statistically significant. So there was a trend But to be fair, this one did not show a statistically significant difference in requiring students to be masked, where they did see a statistically significant difference with teachers being masked and improving ventilation. So my sort of summary of this is that I will readily admit that the effectiveness of masking for SARS-CoV-2 remains an area of vigorous debate in the research community. So this is talked about regularly, lots and lots of back and forth on this in the research literature and on the debate stage there. The preponderance of evidence would suggest there is a benefit to the wearer and to close contacts of the wearer. There is evidence, I think, for benefit at the population level to protect others and benefit in schools, but that I think is less certain with the evidence quality of only being sort of low to moderate quality, and the degree of the benefit is uncertain. Randomized controlled trials of certain types can help answer these questions, but they're hard to do and they're expensive. I do think we'll see more of those coming in the future. I think given the potential benefits, it was potential, we didn't know for certain how good all of this was, and the minimal evidence of harm, which my colleagues will get to in a second, mask mandates were reasonable early in the pandemic when no treatments or vaccines were available. That's giving way now that treatments and vaccines are available, and we're building up a much greater immunity wall against COVID, which is the much more important way of mitigating. So I'll stop there. I think we'll defer questions till the end so that everybody has a chance to present.
Commissioner Garrick, do you have enough, or do you want them to continue? What would you like to do?
If they can go shorter, I mean, I want to hear what they have. They spent the time to come and talk to us. If we want to speak for 5 minutes,
Okay.
I'm happy to hear them.
Dr. Carson, we'll wait questions to the end then. I think you have two other presenters, if that's okay. Good report. Thank you. I think, Tracy, you're going to introduce our next speaker, or Dr. Nagpal going to speak next?
Yes, hi. Thanks for allowing me the time to present. And let me, let's see if I can, I hope everyone can see my slides okay.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah. So, just to build up on where Dr. Carson left off, we have these, we want straightforward answers for complex questions, and we have a tendency to think about things in black and white, whether masks work or they don't work. But, this is a false dichotomy. Mask is not going to provide you 100% protection, and it's not going to be completely useless. So the truth is somewhere in between. And this is not the only thing that that's under the false dichotomy. We have dealt with a lot of questions with COVID in healthcare, in medicine, what's the risk of reinfection, whether somebody can get a reinfection after an infection, how much vaccine is effective, how much of it is spread by droplet or aerosols, and how much a symptomatic or an asymptomatic person can spread or not spread. So, all of these questions, they don't have straightforward answers. And that's true for many things in medicine. Even our best medicines don't work 100% of the times. They work certain number of times, or they have a certain percent of efficacy. So it's not surprising that with mask also, we are not going to get a straightforward answer. Yes, they are protective 100% times, or they are completely useless. The truth, as Dr. Carson very nicely illustrated in his presentation, is that they do provide protection. How much of that protection, that varies depending on how you wear it or which mask you wear it, and how much, whether you wear it, how long you wear it, or whether you wear it properly. And when we talk about masks, it's only part of the mitigation strategy. If you take the rest of these layers out in preventing a pandemic or spread of infection, the efficacy of the mask will go down by itself. By itself, it will not stop the pandemic if you remove the other layers of protection, which is what has been happening over the last 1 year. I understand that travel restrictions are not sustainable. Quarantine can only work so much. Lockdowns are not sustainable. So when those layers go, you have less layers of protection, and masks become less effective in absence of other proper use or other protection measures. So I, for us in healthcare, this is a non-issue. We know masks work. We have been running a COVID treatment unit for 2 years. We have been running COVID infusion unit for 1 year. And, of all the infections that we have seen in healthcare workers, how many infections have spread in our COVID unit? A grand total of 1. And this is reflected in our studies too, when we have looked at healthcare workers. This is from Mass General. What they found out was before we started using masks universally, the rate of COVID and healthcare workers was rising exponentially. Once the mask went into use, the rate of acquisition of COVID and healthcare workers kind of plateaued. It didn't go down to 0. It plateaued, and after a certain time, especially with more universal masking, where the patients also started masking, it finally started to come down. So this is another study from Southern Netherlands. They were looking at 3 different cities, hospitals based in 3 different cities, to see how much healthcare workers were contributing to the spread of infection and whether the protection offered by the personal protective equipment or the PPE that we use is enough. What this diagram shows you is that these are community events, the ones in gray. They are super spreader events in the community. And of course, most healthcare workers get their infection not in the hospital because they are masking and the patients are masking, but they catch it from their family members or from out in the community doing other activities. And when they do get sick, who else gets sick in the hospital? The people they have lunch with in the break room when their masks are off. What this diagram shows you, and it's a very well done study because they have traced each and every infection that's been transmitted by using whole genome sequencing. And what they find is that most of the infections that happen in healthcare workers are acquired outside the hospital in the community. And when they spread it, they spread it in the break rooms, which has been our experience too. The spread from patient to healthcare worker or the other way around is relatively rare. Now, what are the side effects of mask? Every time we design an intervention or recommend an intervention, we try to weigh the risks and benefits of mask or any kind of intervention. Here you can clearly see that, masks have some side effects. Most prominently, they cause skin issue, whether it's subcutaneous bruising by wearing mask for a long period of time. Now that's primarily with N95 mask, not so much with cloth mask or surgical mask. But, those masks also cause some acne problems, dermatological problems. So yes, they have side effects. And they also cause fogging of the glasses, which is a particular problem for those of us who need glasses all the time. However, when you talk about more serious effects, do the masks cause decrease in oxygen? Absolutely not. And this has been demonstrated in a number of studies. This is one where the study done in about 34 people, and about 70 people, 34 of them female, and these are relatively young people, average age 33 years. They have some comorbidities, but they are not too sick. And when they are masking, what happens to their oxygen or carbon dioxide? Nothing changes whether they are masking or not masking. When they are walking briskly with the mask on, yes, their heart rate increases. Whenever you walk or run, your heart rate increases. But what happens to your oxygen and carbon dioxide? It doesn't change when you're wearing a mask. This is another study looking at the same issue, and this is in elderly people, average age about 76 and a half years, almost equally between men and women. And these are patients who have more medical problems, and it shows the same thing. Wearing a mask does not reduce your oxygen. And then this study is from the VA. These are 123 veterans who have underlying COPD, lung disease. These are people who use oxygen at home, get frequent pneumonias. And what the study shows that once they started wearing masks and practicing social distancing in 2020, the number of exacerbations, which is the number of pneumonias or increased oxygen demand, which they have every now and then, and that requires hospitalization, that number of episodes fell off the cliff because they were practicing masking and social distancing. There have been now I'm talking about these adult studies, but this is a study that was done in Singapore. This was in children, and this was looking at N95 mask, not the cloth or surgical mask, N95 mask, which is more properly fitting. And can get really uncomfortable if worn for a long period of time because it's people feel hot when they're wearing this mask. But even in children, and this was a study that was done primarily to look for mask as to mitigate air pollution effect, not so much for COVID. But the idea was to look for harm rather than benefit and make sure that the mask was safe. And what they found was that, it did not make any difference to the oxygen. And there was minimal change in carbon dioxide, which was not impacting their health or any other change in clinical parameters. And children, they wore it with comfort. It was fitting properly, and it was there were no health issues with this, so it was safe. Now, social interaction, that's a little bit hard to measure, but again, what we see here on this slide is that when children are wearing masks, they do have some difficulty with understanding different emotions, but that's no different than when somebody's wearing sunglasses. So, and children are very resilient and they are very adaptable. We understand emotion and social development. These things depend on different things, not just facial expression. They depend on language, they depend on body gestures, they depend on volume. And we see this, in our clinical practice too. We take care of a lot of elderly patients. They have hearing issues, or sometimes they come to the hospital and they forget their, hearing aids. So what happens with them is we try to compensate, and so do children. And children do better job because they are a lot more resilient and adaptable. So you just either raise your volume or you practice more hand gestures, and you are easily able to compensate for that. So and also, there have been studies that show that blind children, they attain the social milestones at the same time. So even if you can't see the face properly, you do compensate for it in different variety of ways. And then there was concern about bacterial contamination of masks, and I think this is the paper that was provided as an evidence of that. I would just like to point out that every surface that you culture is going to grow bacteria. The table you're sitting on, if you take a swab and put it on a petri dish, a number of bacteria will grow on that. That doesn't mean anything. Similarly, if you culture a mask, yes, the bacteria that are present in your mouth will grow from your mask surface, but that's the bacteria that's already in your mouth, and these are bacteria which don't cause pneumonias. These are bacteria that are present in your mouth. These are friendly bacteria. And there was some concern about endocarditis with a bug called Roseomonas. That's a bloodstream infection, that you cannot breathe in a bacteria that goes into your heart valve. That's biologically impossible. So what happens here is you are just seeing the same bacteria. This is friendly bacteria that's contaminating the mask. That's not going to make a difference or increase the number of infections that you are getting. We run an oncology unit where we have the most immunocompromised patients, and as a rule, they have to wear a mask when they are out and about because their immune systems are compromised. Those patients don't end up getting pneumonias with normal bacteria in their mouth. That's already their built-in bacteria that's providing providing protection against environmental pathogens. So in summary, the masks are safe and effective, but yes, they are inconvenient. That doesn't mean they are not safe and they don't work. They are hard to wear properly and consistently, and they are only one part of mitigation strategy. And these things make them unsustainable as a long-term solution. And this is why the mask mandate was ended when it was ended. So yes, we cannot keep wearing masks forever, but that doesn't mean it's not safe and effective. And I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Dr. Severson, could you keep to 5 minutes? Would that be okay? Grant, can you get your stuff done in 5 minutes, please? And you're on mute.
Sorry,
right?
I'm muted. Yes, I can. Yes,
Okay.
I can. There
Thank
go.
you very much.
Yep. So I was asked to talk about health misinformation and disinformation. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay. I like political cartoons because they often convey a lot of information with just a picture. And this is one that I saw recently. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and the 5th is misinformation. The Surgeon General within the last year has declared a health care emergency related to health misinformation, not just to COVID-19, but also in other areas. The biggest reason for this is that it causes confusion, mistrust, can harm people's health, and undermines public health efforts. Limiting the spread of this is a moral and civic imperative that require whole of society effort. Health misinformation is not a new thing. You can go back to 1808 with Edward Jenner and his original smallpox vaccination. There's political cartoons talking about that and trying to debunk his science. You can go to the 80s when the AIDS epidemic came out and other political cartoons. And so one thing that the Office of the Surgeon General has provided is a community toolkit for addressing health information. And that's where I'm getting the majority of my info. So misinformation is false information shared by people who do not intend to mislead others, usually shared by people who do not know or cannot recognize that the claims are misleading or false. And most of the time, these things are done for benign reasons. They're trying to address concerns, they're trying to rationalize confusing situations, and they're looking for answers. Disinformation, on the other hand, is spread intentionally to serve a malicious purpose, such as to trick people into believing something for financial gain or political advantage. Misinformation is in particular an issue currently because we are in an infodemic, and that's essentially an overabundance of facts, some accurate and some not, that make it hard for people to find trustworthy sources and reliable guidance. The reason why misinformation also happens is people are desperate for answers, especially when they're scared or where there's a global pandemic occurring. So they feel depressed, overwhelmed, emotionally drained. And we're also in a society where we are looking for instant gratification. We are looking for instant answers that are expected, that are simple, and that make sense to us. So why is it tempting? Again, like we talked about, we feel like that we have new information that others don't know. We want to protect the people we care about. We may be seeking explanations or wanting to share information that help us make sense of events. And we want to feel connected to others. And that's a real important one because social media, by and large, has been one of the biggest drivers of misinformation and disinformation through the pandemic. Obviously, this has started to improve, but it continues to be a big problem. So there's about 7 different types of people that the Office of the Surgeon General identify as spreading misinformation. There's a disinformer who deliberately creates harmful disinformation, the mischief maker who people do for fun, hoaxer who's doing that to fool people, often to make money. The enthusiast is they post information frequently in support of someone. A believer is someone who's deeply connected to an online community that's pushing false, misleading claims. An oversharer is someone who sees something online and they want to share without checking because they want people to know. And then a casual sharer. I tend to spend a lot of time online and sometimes share carelessly just because they want to. Different disinformation tactics include using visual clues or symbols, creating a professional website, including posts about secondary information, and then creating content that looks like a first-person experience. Sources of misinformation and disinformation, like I said, are social media algorithms. Within those, we have information silos, where social media would directly determine what news feeds we are seeing. And oftentimes, the more we click on a certain type of thing, the more we're going to see of that. Websites that look professional or professional, misusing quotes, misleading graphs and diagrams, and then cherry picking statistics. I wanted to talk about websites in particular and misuse quotes. One website that if you want to see misinformation is for the Midwest Public Health Coalition. This is an organization that does not have any public health training or experience. And you can see even within their logo, they use the picture of the Red Cross. Interestingly, as opposed to any other actual public health website, you see a button for contributing. That is not something you see on the Cass County Public Health website. And the reason for that is because this is not a not-for-profit. Even though they say they're a nonprofit, nonpartisan charitable organization based in North Dakota, but their donations are not tax deductible. And they're not tax deductible because they're not a charitable organization. You can search on the IRS for looking for tax-exempt organizations throughout the country, and they are not listed as a charitable organization. And so what you have to wonder, what is their motivation for having this website? These are a couple of examples of posters that they presented that show a lot of hyperbole, and they try to use scare tactics and to have people attend these sessions. And you can see that their main content experts are people that do not even have degrees.
Doctor, we're going
healthcare.
on about 10 minutes here. If you could wrap, we're getting a little off topic. Misinformation, disinformation, not exactly clinical studies talking about masks. So if you could try to wrap here in the next couple.
Sure. And then finally, there's a misused quote example. So you can see this person used a cutoff quote. And if you looked at the actual study they referenced, which is the effectiveness of adding a mask recommendation to other public health measures, you can see that they cut off the actual conclusion. And by doing so, they intentionally misled an audience. Finally, the health and misinformation checklist. So this is a checklist that they recommend anytime you see data, and that's to find a reputable source, find a credible health professional or healthcare or doctor or nurse, look in the search engine to see if it's been verified, look at the websites themselves to make sure they seem credible, and then if you're not sure, don't share. That's all I got.
Thank you. Any questions of the commission?
Nope, I just want to say thank you to them. Your testimony is not part of the public record, and that adds value to our conversation. And if you could provide whatever background studies and things that you used, again, I'd appreciate that so we can put it as part of the public record, and I'd be interested in reading those myself as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel. We'll take a 5-minute break and then come back. Thank you. We'll come back into session, and I believe Commissioner Pepcorn's joined us. Thank you, Commissioner Pepcorn. We are going to do some slides here. I don't think you'll be able to see, but I'll ask him to try to explain it to you. Number 35, annual review of the FM ambulance and Sanford ambulance program. Chief Dirksen to introduce.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Tonight we have a little change from what we've done before. We've had an ambulance review oversight committee before. We retooled that last year and thought that we would have Sanford Ambulance come and do an annual report of the things that are going on that they're seeing within the community. They've been a great partner in serving our community alongside police, fire, public health, all of us working together. And Desi Fleming and I are kind of the co-chairs of the committee, and we sit together and we work through all of the reports and everything on a quarterly basis and review them with FM, or I guess Sanford. I still want to say FM. They changed it, had a name change this last year. So tonight I'm going to introduce Tim Meyer, who's the executive director of Sanford Ambulance, and he's going to go through their report for you.
Thanks, Chief. Like you said, my name is Tim Meyer. I'm the Senior Director at Sanford Ambulance, and thank you for inviting me to the commission.
And you've been with the ambulance team how long? How many years now, Tim?
I've actually worked for Sanford for 24 years, mostly with the flight program, but I took over as a Senior Director 4 years ago.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you a little background on the ambulance service. Since this is the first time I've presented here, I'd like to give you some background information. We're an advanced life support ambulance service, and we're licensed in both North Dakota and Minnesota, and we serve multiple cities within Cass and Clay County. Last year, we responded to more than 35,000 ambulance calls in our footprint. We have 17 ambulances and multiple support vehicles and an ambulance capable of transporting 20 patients lying down. So as you can see on the slide, we have 133 team members. 89 of those are paramedics, 39 EMTs, and 18 dispatchers. Another background bit of information, we're accredited by CAS, the Commission on Accreditation of Ambulance Services. We just had our reaccreditation visit last year, which we passed with no deficiencies. And the CAS folks described our ambulance service as being in the top 1% of all ambulances in the United States. And just for context, there are about 30,000 ambulance services in our country. We're also proud to have been awarded the Mission Lifeline Gold Plus designation by the American Heart Association. And also proud that we're one of 33 ambulance services in the country that have had that designation every year it's been available. So in 2021, we averaged about 1,340 911 requests in the city of Fargo per month. They're closely split between emergency and non-emergency calls, and that each call is coded at the Red River Regional Dispatch Center, and based on the severity of the coding, that determines the response agencies and the response mode. If you have any questions about all these numbers, please feel free to ask. We end up transporting a patient to the hospital about 60% of the time. We have no patient contact at all about 25% of the time, and about 15% of the time of the calls, a person is evaluated by the ambulance crew, and for whatever reason, they aren't transported to the hospital. About 70% of the patients are transported to Sanford, 26% to Essentia, and 4% to the VA. That split has been pretty consistent over the years. You might ask, how do we determine that? The hospital of choice is primarily determined by the patient, the patient's physician, or the patient's family members, 91% of the time. A small percentage of the patients transported are to the closest facility, and that's due to an acute medical condition that wouldn't tolerate a longer transport. We met our response time goal of arriving on scene within 9 minutes, 94.7% of the time. Our goal is to meet that standard at 90% of the time. So we do exceed that goal routinely. And I don't have a slide for it, but I'd like to tell you what the top 5 ambulance calls in Fargo are. Number 1 is alcohol use, 5.5% of our calls as a primary impression, but 18.3% of all ambulance calls involved alcohol use. Number 2 is behavioral psychiatric episodes at 5%. Number 3 was abdominal pain at 3.5%. Number 4 is generalized weakness, 2.5%, and number 5 is chest pain at 2.4%. One concerning point over this past year is that we've seen a 95% increase in the number of patients in an opioid overdose between 2020 and 2021. So that's a concerning point for our community. Hopefully that trend does not continue. I guess that's my planned presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. This is really interesting information. When you're talking about the opioid use, such a dramatic increase, how are you responding to your personnel not being exposed to fentanyl and the powder, the risks that might be affiliated with being near some of those?
I don't think we often are handling the drug that somebody is overdosed on. We deal with the patient. So we always wear personal protective equipment. We have gloves. When we still wear masks when we're around patients and eye protection. So we do keep people away from those contaminants.
Tim, I think sometimes the public thinks that if you're next to an overdose and they have some of those drugs, that it can immediately cause a respiratory arrest for the personnel. That doesn't happen. These drugs don't interact that way.
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Preston.
So going back to the slide where you have about 95% of your response time is under 9 minutes, did you say?
Correct.
Okay. So I've always wondered, and I'm assuming this can be explained away by the fact that you initiate any kind of emergency, respond immediately on site if there's a true bad emergency going on. I've always wondered about all the emergency rooms now are way out on the south side of Fargo, and how that impacts your service delivery when you're talking up north Fargo.
Well, most of the calls within our footprint happen in Fargo. About 77% of all of our calls are in Fargo, and most of them are north of Main Avenue in the population center of North Fargo. So we do a lot of ambulance calls in that area. We do have a post that's actually based in the Broadway Hospital. So we have an ambulance up there continually. We do see a pull for when ambulances are transporting, they do get pulled down to the hospitals on the south side of the city, but that's our burden to make sure that we cover the city at all times.
Tim, can you explain where you put your ambulances on a daily basis, where you have more high quality calls, but how many ambulances do you have in the city of Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo on a daily basis?
So it staggers throughout the day based on volume. At peak periods, we have 12 trucks on the street. And we have 5 brick and mortar buildings throughout the community, but we have actually 16 posting sites. So depending how busy it is, they might be at the Broadway Hospital, or they might be on a street corner or a parking lot waiting for the next call. So we have gathered data for decades on ambulance calls we have our own dispatchers, and the CAD system does predict where the calls are going to be, and the heat map generally looks the hottest in North Fargo. So we know that's a primary spot for ambulance coverage.
If I could just
Continue.
clarify, the question I was asking was more related to, have you seen any kind of negative impact on the outcomes of the individuals that you have picked up because emergency rooms are so far away? Any negative impact?
I can't say that I've seen that, a negative impact. I do know that it has caused more work for the ambulance service. Just adding another hospital added a lot of crosstown transfers, so that added to the volume for the ambulance service.
But one of the things, Tim, what you say, AED coming along, you're actually starting resuscitation in the ambulance. So even though we're concerned about how far it gets to go up north to south, you've already started with drugs, medication, intubation. Things are much better now for intubation, much easier to do than the old days, right? I mean, you've got good tools to do that. So in some ways, we're starting resuscitation the minute you pick up the patient. Now, I don't want to get John Strand concerned because he's going to move to South Fargo at some time, John, and I don't want him to feel they can't get to him quick enough, but your different ways you do stuff do help that
As an
out,
advanced life support ambulance, we have paramedics in the trucks, and the paramedics do intubate people. We do defibrillate and push life-saving medications. We can do all that in the field. You only have a small window to resuscitate somebody in a cardiac arrest situation, and time is very meaningful to that person. That's why we train EMTs and paramedics to do that in the field.
One more question.
Commissioner Preston.
Sorry. So do you follow outcome data in regards to those that you drop off in emergency room? How many of them actually survive?
Of cardiac arrests?
Just overall, and over time, has that changed?
I'm going to have to ask my data guy if we know that one off the cuff like that, sorry.
It's a really tough thing to track that because we use this data system called NEMSIS, and it's federally mandated, and current version that just came out a few months ago uses 640 data elements, and they change that on us 2 times a year usually, so it's very hard to track stuff from day to day. A couple, I think, maybe highlighting points to answer some questions there. The Mission Lifeline thing with cardiac care, I said this at the AOC meeting or the Ambulance Oversight Committee meeting. I'll take my 2 seconds here to share it, but I would be happy to have a heart attack in Fargo, right? I don't want to have one, but your average time from the time an ambulance gets to your door till your vessels are opened in the cath lab in our town is 47 minutes. That's unheard of in most of the US. Like if you're having a heart attack, you don't go to the ER, you go straight to the cath lab. So we do a lot of innovative things like that to reduce 5-year morbidity mortality rates. We get further with that than that transport across town piece. As Director Meyer mentioned, it does take a little more time to get out there, but the initial stabilizing care that you would receive in the ER if you showed up in the ER, you're getting the same thing out in the ambulance for those initial get your heart going again type things. And then we clearly expedite you into the definitive care, like getting those blockages opened up. Does that help at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing, your award you got from American Heart Association, I mean, we're doing quite a bit of CPR in the community as well. Is that not right?
Yes, we do have a pretty robust community outreach to teach CPR. Sometimes we have something at the mall to teach hands-only CPR to the public. It's gotten easier to learn CPR over the years by a long shot.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that if it most have a heart attack, it's here in Fargo. Good report, and glad that was. Any other questions by the commissioners? Commissioner Preston.
What's the relationship between the city and the ambulance service? I mean, is there any kind of normal relationship?
Fire department.
We have a contract, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We do have a contract that outlines a few things like reporting to this body about ambulance data. But the ambulance in general is licensed by the state. Sanford Ambulance is a part of Sanford Health, and we serve the communities in Fargo, West Fargo, Moorhead, and a lot of other communities within the county.
So years ago, before Tim was here, I think the FM ambulance used to be representatives from all the hospitals. We had more hospitals at one time: St. Ansgar, St. John's, Dakota, Sanford, or Ameritcar.
Correct.
And it was a community type of entity in which members were elected or brought forth on that board. And then when Sanford took it over, the attempt what this was just make sure distribution of patients was fair, and then you did with other purpose of save lives, and to see that you're doing that job. And so the relationship with the city is we get involved because we I don't know if we necessarily license you, but we just have a contract with you to provide services in the community.
Correct.
And what we did is we used to meet monthly and then went to quarterly reporting, and then went to a yearly report. So this is actually, Commissioner Preston, one of the first time they've reported to us for a while. Okay. So at this point, if you are unhappy with response time, what they're doing or what's happening, commissioners would be welcome to put that input into them. I think it's a great time to brag about a great service, because truly this community benefits, but paramedics in the field, people can get you. Commissioner Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. For the sake of sharing it with the public, some of us have had some conversations in the past several months about a modern day policing topic, which isn't necessarily here, but it's one that I was asking. There are some ambulance services that utilize with their police departments ketamine. And for the sake of public disclosure, best I can tell, we do not use that here. It's not part of our protocol. It isn't used at all in a sense of when you have somebody showing up in an ambulance and you need to subdue them. Now, if that's different, but that's my sense of it. I think it's an important topic for the public to know. It's not a big deal here, but it has been happening across the country. And I commend our law enforcement and our local medical providers for being where they are with that topic.
I think what you're referring to, there's been a couple of national stories about ambulance services medicating prisoners or somebody apprehended by the police just to control their behavior. We don't do that. We don't get pressured by the police to medicate people that they're having trouble controlling as part of their police work. So that's never been an issue here.
Good to know. Any other discussion? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Appointments to the Fargo Police Advisor and Oversight Board. Chief Zabowski to explain, and Christy Jacobson.
Good evening, Commissioners. So we're kind of at the pinnacle of about a year's worth of work here that's been contributed by many folks. from community organizers to city admin to our city attorney's office, our director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and many members of our department, of which Sergeant Christy Jacobson has done a lot of work throughout the whole process. She's going to continue to be kind of the point of contact on our inaugural Police Department Advisory and Oversight Board. So just to kind of recap what's happened in the last couple of months, on November 29th, the commission approved the ordinance forming the board. The selection committee began work on getting together questions, and on January 10th, the application packets were noticed and sent out, indicating publicly that we would conduct the first review of applications on January 27th, which we did. We had a large pool at that time. We interviewed, then broke that down and interviewed 13 people, February 8th through February 10th, and ultimately selected 7 individuals this evening who we were very impressed with. I think you'll have the pictures up on the screen there. It was a really, really good pool overall. I think everyone was very impressed with the pool of citizens that applied with sincere interest in participating in this board. And upon completing the interviews, the selection committee was unanimous in the selection of these individuals, and just in terms of their commitment and sincere interest in improving police community relations, but also their backgrounds, their competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities that they will bring to this board to help those discussions and those relationships going forward. So we're very excited to get them on board, and I'm asking for the commission to approve their appointment. Subsequent to that, we will start the training, and the board should be set to start in April.
Thank you. Christy, you got anything to add? You like this slate of people? You think they're going to do a good job?
I agree. I do.
Good. Any questions by commissioners? Commissioner Garrett.
Yeah, we had a person in the audience here had some questions about who was selected. So if you would like, do you want to address some of his concerns?
Well, I actually did meet with Mr. Cohn last week, and I explained all that to him, so yeah, I provided him those answers.
Okay, fair enough.
Motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Preston?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
No.
Mahoney?
Yes. You have my recommendations for the Native American Commission. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Preston?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 39, application for property tax exemption for improvements made to buildings. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Preston?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Yes. The date set for the Board of Equalization is April 12th, 2022 at 7:30 a.m. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call vote.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Preston?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Mr. Strand, you're back from Key West. Do you have any announcements to make today?
I wish I was in Key West, but I am back. Thank you, though. I don't have any birthdays to announce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're adjourned.